Intense efforts at the UN to try to save what's left of the ceasefire in Syria. All aid convoys in Syria are suspended after last night's attack on lorries carrying vital supplies.
Just when we think it cannot get any worse, the bar of depravity sinks lower.
We'll be asking if there's any chance now that a diplomatic solution can be found. Also tonight, leaving after 8 hours of talks, but Labour's ruling body fails to agree how its shadow cabinet should be formed. Tiny victims of war, Yemen's starving children, around 1.5 million in desperate need of food. We have a special report. A hero's welcome for Britain's triumphant Paralympians as they fly home from Rio. And after 12 years together, Hollywood's most famous couple head for the divorce courts.
In the south, Border Force officers detain 8 illegal immigrants at the port of Poole within 2 weeks. And unions demand action after ambulance workers claim they've not been paid for weeks.
Good evening. Intense efforts are underway at the United Nations to try to salvage what's left of the ceasefire in Syria. Aid convoys have been suspended after yesterday's attack on 31 lorries near Aleppo. The International Committee of the Red Cross said at least 20 people were killed. It described what happened as a flagrant violation of international law. Russia, Syria and the US have all said they weren't responsible. Our correspondent James Robbins reports from the UN in New York.
Aid for Syria's most desperate, attacked and destroyed. Aid workers and truck drivers killed. If the ceasefire wasn't already dead, it's hard to see it surviving this. Moscow and Damascus deny any involvement, hinting the fires here mysteriously started as opposition forces mounted attacks elsewhere. But last night, someone deliberately targeted vital UN supplies for 78,000 people.
This is the warehouse of the Syrian Christians, the UN Refugee Agency. This is full of blankets from the Refugee Agency.
The United Nations is outraged, ordering the suspension of all convoys to protect aid workers.
It's sickening, it's disgusting, and if it is proved to be deliberate, it would amount to a war crime. Our hearts go out to those who've lost lives. They were the selfless people bravely trying to get aid into people who so desperately needed it in eastern Aleppo. And there are many injured, and the warehouses are destroyed.
Now Russia's defense ministry has released drone footage it says shows the aid convoy. Moscow says that for a time the convoy had a rebel escort with a mortar on a pickup truck, and that there's no evidence of any airstrike. This quite separate attack on eastern Aleppo is further evidence the ceasefire is finished. The victims in this rebel-held area bear witness to that. Syrian forces had already declared the ceasefire over, resuming bombardment. But all sides had breached the ceasefire, and the Russians stress the accidental US bombing of Syrian troops at the weekend played its part too. Seen from the perspective of the United Nations here in New York, dedicated to peace, any sort of ceasefire, however fragile, must be better than all-out war. But to fighters on the ground, it can look very different. The rebel side fears a peace settlement could strip them of all their gains. President Assad and his Russian backers still believe they can retake the entire country. Still, the United States hopes to salvage something. But watch John Kerry and the UN Syria envoy and look at today's cold distance between them and Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. In this diplomatic turmoil, the UN Secretary-General was unusually blunt, using his final speech to accuse Syria's government of the greatest war crimes of a very dirty war.
Just when we think it cannot get any worse, the bar of depravity sinks lower. Many groups have killed many innocents, but none more so than the government of Syria.
The destruction of the aid convoy, the killing of aid workers, whoever was responsible, symbolises a war in Syria which looks, for now, unstoppable. James Robbins, BBC News at the United Nations in New York.
Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is in New York. And the aid convoys have stopped. Millions of people in Syria need that food. Is there any hope at all of rescuing the ceasefire?
Well, there were many doubters about this ceasefire. Many felt that John Kerry was, to use their expression, on a fool's errand, that this cessation of hostilities, as it's called, a truce, would never hold. And they've been proven right. But when you are in the deep, dark hole that is Syria, every small pinprick of light is grasped. I spoke to someone who was in that meeting this morning of all of the groups involved in Syria, 11 foreign ministers around the table, including Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry, and was told that everyone at that table, whether they supported the Syrian government or the opposition, said, we have to get this truce back on track, but that nobody knew how to do that. All that they've agreed so far here in New York is that because they're all here in one city, they will try again to meet later this week to try to get it started. A lot of pressure is on John Kerry and on Sergei Lavrov, but the relationship between these two men, who have been meeting for months, is strained again. In the last few hours, American officials told me that they believe it was Russian warplanes who attacked that UN convoy. They said, they used a military term called a double tap. They said that was too sophisticated for the Syrian Air Force. They believe that the Russians did it. And of course you ask, well, why would they do that? They've signed the deal. It's known that in the Russian military, as in the American military, they're deeply skeptical about this deal between Russia and America, and they don't want it to go ahead. But I think even though we say that everyone is saying it's not dead, it's hanging by a thread, but they will continue to try to do something to bring Syria back from the brink. To do nothing would to say that what's happening in Syria is acceptable, but by any international norm, it is not. Possible war crimes are being committed day in, day out in Syria. And it's not just Syria's war anymore, it's everyone's war.
Lise Doucette in New York, thank you. After 8.5 hours of negotiations, Labour's ruling body, the National Executive Committee, has failed to agree on how to form its shadow cabinet. The party's deputy leader, Tom Watson, had proposed that MPs should be allowed to elect shadow cabinet members. But the party's leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was calling for ordinary party members to have a say. Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, reports, and just a warning, there are some flashing images.
Mr. Corbyn, what do you make of the results tonight?
He must be used to the flashes of the camera.
You happy with this evening's results?
Thank you so much for coming. Really nice to see you.
On the verge of Jeremy Corbyn winning for a second time.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Labour can't yet agree on how to come together.
Have your signature on there, please, mate?
There's no question about the huge appeal he has to legions of supporters.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
But this is the problem. Now you see them, but after Jeremy Corbyn lost the support of dozens of his shadow team, now you don't. His replacement shadow ministers are more loyal, but far less experienced, and the team has vacancies. So during 8.5 hours of talks, a plan was proposed by the deputy leader to elect the shadow team. But after waiting and waiting and waiting, tonight's agreement was just to talk some more.
Disappointed you didn't get your reforms through tonight?
No, I'm very pleased. We had a very positive meeting. We have talks arranged to try and bring the PLP back together, reporting back to our National Executive Committee on Saturday.
But Jeremy Corbyn wants a bigger, longer review of the party's democracy, basking, secure in support from thousands upon thousands of party members. His team is in no hurry to give way.
There was a positive, I think, productive conversation, workmanlike. There's much more to do.
But Mr. Trickett, if there have been discussions for more than 8 hours already, it doesn't bode well for agreement being reached on this.
There was a whole range of conversations, and I wouldn't want to leave you with the impression that somehow we spent 8 hours discussing a single subject.
Discussions are one thing, divisions are another. And in Labour there's still one big one. His supporters believe with heart and soul Jeremy Corbyn is the solution. Most MPs think he's the problem. This bruising leadership contest has not changed that at all.
And Laura Kuenssberg is at Westminster now. It's certainly been a dramatic few months in the Labour Party, yet more drama tonight, just as the leadership ballot is about to close.
That's right, Sophie. You know, Labour went into this contest divided and upset. And I think it ends this contest. We're almost there now in the same state. The wounds of what's been a pretty brutal year in Westminster for the Labour Party are still fresh. And if anything, the summer's contest has actually deepened them. And in the last few minutes, Owen Smith, the man who's been trying to oust Jeremy Corbyn after challenging him from the leadership, has released a statement. He's thanked his members and his supporters around the country. But sources close to him say far from this being an admission of defeat. In fact, he's being pretty defiant. He said, "I regret the state that the party is in, but I do not regret being the one to say it." So from his side of the argument, there's no sign at all really of any kind of peace talks forthcoming. And if today's discussions, more than 8 hours with few clear agreements on the big proposals, if they're a taste of what's to come, that's a sign of just how difficult it's going to be for Labour to pull together after Saturday's result, whatever it is going to be. And it doesn't bode well.
Laura, thank you. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has used her first speech at the United Nations in New York to say that Britain will not turn away from the world despite the vote to leave the EU. Addressing the General Assembly, she said the UK would continue to be a confident, strong and dependable international partner. From New York, here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
Theresa May's moving in powerful circles just now, but even before the presidents and prime ministers get to know her, the relationships are changing. Today, President Obama, who appealed to Britain, don't leave the EU, urged countries don't turn inwards, work together. Mrs May's trying to show that's the plan. One leader, then another, almost before the last one's out the door. Sometimes high diplomacy looks a bit like speed dating. Theresa May's pitch, Britain may be leaving the EU, but was still a global player. Her big message to the UN.
For when the British people voted to leave the EU, they did not vote to turn inwards or walk away from any of our partners in the world.
Britain's global role would continue. The UN mattered, but leaders had to listen to their people.
Faced with challenges like migration, a desire for greater control of their country, and a mounting sense that globalisation is leaving working people behind, they demanded a politics that is more in touch with their concerns and bold action to address them.
Her key ministers watching, she set out future cooperation, more help and an international conference on fighting Islamist militants in Somalia, more aid for refugees in Eritrea, and the Paris Treaty on International Climate Change would be approved by the end of the year. Another summit in Bratislava last week showed Britain may have a hard task ahead. The Slovakian leader, who met Theresa May in July, said Brexit would be painful for Britain. To show life outside the EU could be tough.
Theresa May insists she'll get a good deal for Britain in Europe and the world. Maybe so, but redesigning Britain's role will be hard. No one, her included, can know the final outcome, and there'll be plenty of political struggles along the way.
In countless summits and conferences to come, the UK's future as a political and trading power will take shape. A long journey, while Theresa May is urged to go faster or slower by political backseat drivers, and she copes with impatient demands for detail. The nagging question, are we there yet? John Pienaar, BBC News, at the United Nations in New York.
A brief look at some of the day's other news stories now, and the Liberal Democrat leader has appealed to Labour members to join his party to stop the Conservatives winning the next election. Tim Farron told his party's conference that only they can provide strong opposition to the government. He also demanded another referendum on the final deal that is negotiated between the UK and the EU. The Welsh Government says it will create thousands of apprenticeships and expand free childcare under its new 5-year programme, but the minority Labour government accepted that such pledges would have to be offset by cuts elsewhere. The British Medical Association has expressed concerns about plans to force consultants to reveal how much they earn from treating private patients. NHS England wants to make the system more transparent. It's thought about half of England's 46,000 NHS consultants do private work. The father of the man being held on suspicion of carrying out the bomb attacks in New York and New Jersey at the weekend says he told the authorities 2 years ago that his son was a terrorist. But the FBI say he later retracted that claim. Our correspondent Nick Bryant is in New York. So he retracted the claim, but was it investigated all the same?
Sophie, back in August 2014, the FBI carried out what it's called an assessment of Rahami. It conducted multiple interviews. It got in contact with other law enforcement agencies. It put his name through various internal databases. Now, none of them turned up any evidence that he had any ties with terrorism. So after a few weeks, they decided to shut that assessment down. Now, what they didn't do was actually interview Rahami himself. And that looks like a bad mistake now, because effectively they took him off their own radar. What we've also learnt today is that when Rahami was arrested after that shootout with police, he was carrying a notebook. It was drenched in blood. It even had a bullet hole through it. But in it also were writings about jihadist ideology, and he also made mentions of Osama bin Laden and the Boston Marathon bombings. Now, we know that he spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. He made multiple visits there. He had a year-long stay in Pakistan, and investigators will be seeking to determine whether that was where he was radicalized. Did he make any contacts there with other terror groups? And also, was that where he learned how to make bombs? Because law enforcement officials are saying that these were quite skilled bombs. He didn't learn how to do this just off the internet.
Nick Bryant in New York, thank you. The war in Yemen has pushed one of the poorest countries in the Middle East to the brink of famine, threatening the lives of millions of people. Early last year, Yemen's government was overthrown by rebel forces. Soon after, a Saudi-led coalition, backed by Britain and the US, began carrying out a bombing campaign in Yemen to try to remove the rebels. More than 3,500 civilians have been killed in the war, and both sides have been accused of atrocities. It's left around 2 million people acutely malnourished. Most of them are children. BBC Arabic's Nawal Magafi has visited an area where major aid agencies can no longer operate. A warning: her report contains distressing images from the start.
In the villages of Yemen, it's the children who suffer most. Wherever you go, you can see the human cost of this war. 7-month-old Fatima is weak and severely malnourished. She's one of hundreds in this area alone. Her mother, Sarah, tells me she won't stop crying. It breaks my heart, she says. The only thing Sarah can offer her child is water. She's so malnourished herself that she's unable to breastfeed. Dr. Ashwag Muharram took me from village to village. Each time we saw the same thing. Yemen has always been desperately poor, but the war has made things worse. With frequent airstrikes, it's too dangerous for people to leave this area. They rely upon people like Ashwag and the little aid she can deliver. Today she's here to visit another child who's suffering from severe acute malnutrition. Abdurrahman is 18 months old, but weighs as much as a 6-month-old baby. Born 1 month after the start of the war, he has been malnourished all his life, so he can't even walk or talk. Lactose intolerant, Abdurrahman can't digest normal milk. Before the war, the milk he needs was widely available, but his condition now is life-threatening. It's not just the villages that are struggling. This war has forced 600 hospitals to close down, and lack of supplies has pushed this central hospital to the brink. Children are the most affected by malnutrition. Here, hunger has left 1.5 million children starving. This is 4-year-old Shuaib. His grandfather brought him here with fever and diarrhea. Malnutrition has meant his immune system isn't able to fight a simple infection. And severe shortage of medicine means the antibiotic he needs isn't available either.
The antibiotics we have will not treat the type of bacteria that he is suffering from. All we can do is provide health care with the supplies that we have.
The hospital is overwhelmed with children, but in some cases, malnutrition has turned into outright starvation. Salim is 8 years old. Once able to play and talk to his brothers and sisters, his mother says, although he's alive, it's as if he's no longer here.
I never imagined I would ever see a child like this in Yemen. This boy is starving. It scares me that it may be the beginning of a famine.
According to UN figures, there are now 370,000 children with the same level of malnutrition as Salim. 4-year-old Shaib's grandfather tells us his condition has taken a turn for the worse.
He just had fever and diarrhea, and because they didn't have his medicine, he passed away.
Back in the village, Ashwag has some good news. After 6 days of phone calls and negotiations, Ashwag managed to import his life-saving milk.
You've made me so happy and filled our home with happiness. I hope I can do the same for you.
Poverty has always affected Yemen, but now there's a risk of losing an entire generation. Nawal Al-Magafi, BBC News, Hodeidah, Yemen.
And you can see more on the plight of Yemen's children on Our World at 9:30 p.m. this Saturday and Sunday on the BBC News channel or on iPlayer. Now, London is known as Europe's technology hotspot, a city in which the tech scene is booming. But in the aftermath of the Brexit vote, that success could be under threat. The German capital, Berlin, has seen Brexit as an opportunity to lure London tech firms to a city which will remain at the heart of Europe, as our technology correspondent Rory Kethlen-Jones reports in the latest in his series on the state of the UK technology industry.
Two great European cities, each with much to offer young technology companies looking to take on the world. But now Berlin sees a chance to steal a march on London. A few weeks ago, London-based tech entrepreneur Maz Najm was surprised to get a letter from Germany with an invitation for his company.
They got my name, company name and everything, and they're inviting me to move to Berlin.
And over in Berlin, here's who sent the letter to Maz and other London entrepreneurs. The Berlin State Senator for Technology and Industry.
We are a vibrant international city. We offer technology. We attract talents from all over the world. And maybe it's also the right location for a London-based company to open an office here to make sure that they are part of the European Union in future.
Berlin, already the capital of the EU's most powerful nation, now sees an opportunity to steal the title of Europe's tech capital from London. These poles mark the line of the Berlin Wall, and since it came down over a quarter of a century ago, the economy of the city has been transformed. Until recently, though, you couldn't really call it a major technology centre. But in the last couple of years, a wave of money and a lot of encouragement have meant plenty of small tech firms have sprouted here. Suddenly, technology incubators like The Factory are springing up, housing all sorts of ambitious new tech firms.
We have right over here, we have Yasha who's working on a dating app called Fuse, so we're really happy to have him.
There's venture capital to support these companies, and the costs here are much lower than in London.
We're at a very interesting sweet spot here, where we have on the one hand very affordable cost of living, so rent here is not that high, cost of living are not that high, and at the same time we got quite a professional infrastructure.
But back in London, Maz Najm certainly isn't ready to pack his bags.
UK is a lot more mature when it comes to digital and social media. We see our customers here, and beside that, it's home here, you know, Brexit or not.
Berlin may have plenty to offer, but London has the English language and a thriving financial industry, so it won't give up its tech crown without a fight. Rory Catton-Jones, BBC News, Berlin.
Hollywood's most famous couple, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, are getting divorced after 12 years together. The couple have 6 children. Tonight, Brad Pitt said he was very saddened by his wife's decision to end their marriage. The Oscar-winning actress said she'd decided to file for divorce for the health of the family. Our correspondent James Cook reports from Hollywood.
In a town full of golden couples, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt shone the brightest of them all. Beautiful superstar actors epitomising the Hollywood dream. Her lawyer says the divorce was made for the health of the family. He has released a statement saying he's very saddened. And the divorce papers reveal that Angelina wants custody of their 6 children, 3 of whom were adopted internationally.
We don't know whether he will seek to have joint physical custody of the children or sole physical custody of the children. So we don't know if there'll be a custody battle or whether he will just agree.
She was unpredictable. Now, there's no mystery.
It was a movie about a marriage which brought the two together, although Brad was actually married to Jennifer Aniston at the time.
I'm blowing you a kiss.
But maybe life is imitating art. Last year, the pair played a couple whose relationship was on the rocks.
I think it's a reality of marriage that you go through hard times and that you have to embrace those hard times and those challenges and know that that's a part of your marriage, and it's the pulling through together that actually makes the bond.
They were together for more than a decade and married for 2 years. Both are activists, but they often trod different paths. As a goodwill ambassador for the United Nations, Angelina became an outspoken voice for the downtrodden, campaigning to help refugees and promoting breast cancer awareness after undergoing a double mastectomy. In a town obsessed with celebrity, this is big, big news. And it's not just here. Around the world, millions of people are discussing this divorce. But why the fascination?
I just find Angelina very, very gorgeous, and Brad Pitt as well. I thought they made a great couple.
People look at them and they think they have everything, you know what I mean? And they think, like, how could they possibly have a problem? They got looks, they got money, they got love, they got everything, right?
In Hollywood, the rumours swirl as rumours do. Claims of an affair, substance abuse, fights about the children. But only 2 people really know why Brangelina are no more. James Cook, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Britain's triumphant Paralympians have arrived back home on a special flight from Rio. The Queen has paid tribute to them, describing their performances as magnificent. Para-GB won 147 medals altogether, 64 of them gold, and finished second in the medal table. To celebrate, it's been confirmed that there will be parades for GB's Olympic and Paralympic teams, one in Manchester on the 17th of October and one in London a day later. Our sports correspondent Joe Wilson was at Heathrow as the athletes flew in. His report contains some flash photography.
Home, they're here for you. It's here and now that the Paralympians of Rio were confronted with the impact they've had in Britain. Family and friends, well, guaranteed. But congratulations from the Queen.
That's so crazy. I don't know, I feel like normal cad, but everyone seems to think that I've done something special, and it's amazing, the support and kind of the warm welcome. Yeah, it makes me feel so special, and I'm so grateful for everyone that supported me.
And listen, you got a third sport planned for Tokyo?
Not quite yet. I was playing around with the wheelchair basketball a lot, and I was like, ooh, this could be my next sport.
Remember, Cadena won cycling and athletics gold medals in Rio. The table tennis table stands 76 centimetres from the ground.
He's done it now!
Gold medalist Will Bailey showed how it could be scaled. At even higher altitude, he gave the in-flight crew a demonstration on the way home. And there was even a recreation of his yellow card moment. In trouble again. Next, he'll take part in a professional league against able-bodied players in Croatia.
I just want to make table tennis big in this country as well. It's so big in other countries, and I think it deserves to be big in here as well in England.
Well, the success of the British team in Rio has created so much attention on disability sport, and you can get a sense of that continuing here. But there is a question. How much of a difference will any of this make to the day-to-day lives of people with disability in Britain? Dame Sarah Storey returns home now with 14 Paralympic golds and a perspective based on 7 Paralympic Games.
We're not expecting everyone to be Paralympians, but we want them to know that people are looking at them as a person, not as a disabled person, and we hope that their life will improve and they'll have the confidence to go and do things in arts, in music, and find a way to follow their own dreams, whatever they might be.
Well, Sarah Storey believes Britain can do even better at the next Paralympics. There's always room for progress, she told me. With the visually impaired in mind, these Paralympic medals rattle. Each one was one for Britain, yes, but there are special people each competitor strives to please and yearns to see. Reunited in Terminal 5. Joe Wilson, BBC News at Heathrow Airport.
Newsnight's about to begin over on BBC Two in a few moments. Here's Evan Davis.
The Syrian civil war has been going on far longer than World War I, and every attempt to end it seems to fail. Tonight we're asking if this is a war that no one can win, and yet no one can stop. Join me now, BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
That's all from us. Now it's time for the news where you are. Good night.